So, no mai haere mai ki tēnei hui of the Hawke's Bay Civil Defence Emergency Management Group Joint Committee for today. A very warm welcome to you all. To open our meeting, please, Chair Baden Barber, can you open us with a karakia?
Kia ora tātou, kua wiwi mai nei tēnei rā, tā tātou dei kaupapa, kua pai here nei tātou i tēnei rā. Hoi anō tikana kia mihia, kia tangi o tātou mate huhua, rātou te hunga kōrero ki te pō, nō reira, e te tini e te mano, koutou kua ngaro nei, ko te pō kia ara koutou haere, whakangaro atu rā, ka huri pēnei mai kia tātou te ngora, kua pai mai nei tēnei rā, tēnā tātou katoa. E te hea mana, hene wai, tēnā hoki koe, i o mihi whakatau, i a tātou, nei te karakia, ke pai ai tā tātou nei hui tēnei rā, nō reira ki unoi tātou. He ono rei korore ki tātua he maungaroa ki te whenua he whakaaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Tātua ka rawa tēnei mātou, te komiti whakawhaiti tēnei kaupapa, e hui mai nei tēnei rā, kei te tuku whakamoe me te whakawhetai atu rā ki a koe. Mōi ho mai ki a mātou, nāu te timatatanga, te o te ngāngo mea katoa, nō reira, whakauhia mai tō wairua tapu, haera taki a mātou nei kaupapa, tēnei kaupapa nui, kia putai tēnei ripota ki te whaiau ki te Amarama. Hoi no, whakakahia mai a mātou, ngā hapori, mai pari tū ki tūraki rai, tēnei rohenga o kahungunu, kua pākino nei tēnei huripari o Gabriel, nō reira whakakahia mai a mātou, paingia i a mātou katoa, tēnei te mātou ni inu o kia koe mau e whakamana i rungi te ngua tapu o i karai te mātou kai whakaora. Āmene.
Āmene. Kia ora Baden. Me tautoko o kōrero, tō karakia, rātou kua wehe atu ki te pō, rātou kia rātou, tātou kia tātou te hunga ora, tēnā tātou katoa. Very warm welcome to a very important meeting of this joint committee, inviting and welcoming all of you, including our visitors in the gallery, those watching online, our staff, the CE group, and also a special welcome to Rapihana Te Kahaha Waikirangi, who is joining us for the first time in this meeting as the chair of Mana Ahuriri Trust. So a warm welcome to you amongst us in this committee. Kia ora. Okay, we will move into the apologies from last meeting. Okay, can I have a mover and a seconder of those? Of the minutes? Yep. And second, thank you, Sandra. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Are there any conflict of interest declarations to be made in these items? There are none. Thank you. Okay, well, we move into our next item, which is the only decision item today and the most important to discuss. It is the independent review into the Hawke's Bay CDM Group response to Cyclone Gabrielle. I'd just like to acknowledge all our impacted communities, the trauma that they've been through in this disaster, those who have lost loved ones, those whānau who are still getting back on their feet in our communities. Also to the community members who have engaged in this process, who have shared their insight, their feedback, to help inform us moving forward for a stronger region in terms of emergency management. So given that, I'd like to invite our special guest, Mr. Bush. We thank you, your colleagues who have been a part of the panel running this independent review. So what we'll do is have you brief us on this and the releases today. It is the formal presentation of the review and its recommendations. So we'll hand it over to you and then we'll open up for questions and comments. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou, tēnā koutou katoa, na mihi ana te rangatira. Kia ora koutou. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to present our report, and thank you very much for inviting Bush International Consulting to undertake this very critical independent review. I too, before I get into the bones of this, would like to acknowledge all of those that have been affected and involved in this crisis response, particularly those who have lost lives and livelihoods and who have been traumatised. In terms of the review, I will talk to the process and then the findings. So in terms of the review, there was a very clear terms of reference about how we were to approach this. The team that undertook this review are all very experienced in crisis and emergency management and have been involved in former reviews. In terms of the terms of reference, we were asked very much to take a forward-looking, lessons learned, constructive approach to this. It was not a blame apportioning exercise, but very much how do we understand the system, what worked well, what didn't work, and how do we improve for the future. In terms of undertaking that review, the team spent a lot of time on the ground here. We spoke to all of your good selves. We spoke to everyone involved in governance across the region's emergency management. We also interviewed staff involved in the National Emergency Management Group, NEMA. Sought your feedback, and we interviewed everyone, especially those who led the response from an official point of view. We undertook a comprehensive correspondence, shall we say, reviewing all of the correspondence, all of the data that everyone had in relation to this, and we analysed that. We reached out to community groups. We undertook a number of community forums with community groups, volunteers, contractors, mana whenua, PSGs, everyone that we felt could give a perspective and an insight into this response. We also undertook a public-facing survey, and that attracted more than 1,000 responses, which also we included in our review. The way we looked at the review was very much through civil defence emergency management best practice, through the lens of the 4 Rs. So that's reduction, readiness, response and recovery. We added another one in, which a lot of proponents of this consider important, resilience. So not only did we look at it through those 4, shall we say 5 lens, we also framed our recommendations, which I'll talk to shortly through that. As I said, we talked to what worked well. We found that the governance across the region's emergency management was strong, and expectations were clearly set to officials. Their plans were robust in terms of the preparation, and the intent of everyone involved was positive. What didn't work so well, first off, it was absolutely clear that the severity, speed and scale of this disaster quite simply overwhelmed the officials involved in that response. We felt that they lacked situational awareness in terms of what was occurring or what was about to occur. Agreed that that was compounded by communications outages, power outages, the such like, but there should be mitigations in place for such things. That lack of situational awareness, in our view, led to what I would describe as more of a positive bias towards a possible outcome and not planning for what we would describe as worst case scenario. So the mitigations in terms of what could, in the worst case, actually occur would be mitigated. We also found that the capability inside the response, because of the severity and scale and the number of people that needed to be involved, was not at a capability level to where it actually needed to be. And I will talk more about this later, but this isn't just a regional issue. On that point, we did find that the National Emergency Management System is not currently fit for purpose. And the way we would describe that is it actually sets up good people to fail, where the capability, experience isn't at every level and every component of a disaster management response. In terms of where to from here, we have made a number of recommendations. We've made 9 Tier 1 recommendations and 66 Tier 2 recommendations. Those recommendations in Tier 1, again, are through that 4 to 5R lens and are for regional and local civil defence and emergency management to deal with, but also in terms of the national model. And one recommendation is that national model needs to be revisited to ensure that we don't continue to get what we've always got. We have also proposed what we describe as a out-year horizon. So we have given our view of what a solution could look like for you all, a bit of a roadmap in terms of how you address the recommendations, which we think will help you with implementation. So, Chair, I'd like to leave that with you. And
Thank you, Mr Bush, for your synopsis, but also the robust way in which you've run this process. We will open up for questions and comments. Mayor Alex Walker, thank you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mike. And thank you for the way that you've leant into what was quite a challenging terms of reference in terms of the scope of what was required to be able to move forward. And that's part of my question about inputs. So Hawke's Bay is a really large region. Could you just expand a little bit on how far you went north, south, east, west in terms of meeting with people and gathering information for this? Thank you.
yes, in terms of those in response, we went right across the region. So north through Wairoa and south through your area. We held a number of meetings in those places. We invited as many people that would like to come. They didn't always come, and we didn't take offence, but we really take on board the fact that ours is not the only review going on, and there may be some review fatigue out there amongst the community, and maybe a lack of clarity about what ours was about. But we certainly made ourselves available. We were there. Invites were extended. They weren't always taken up, but we made ourselves available across the Motu. In other places, overwhelming attendance from various groups. But thank you for the question.
Further questions? Eden Barber.
Yeah, kia ora, Mike. Just in terms of your observation around mana whenua, I mean, I know you came and talked with us and you went out to a whole lot of PSGs and Papu Marae. And you mentioned, you know, the national part of CEDM needs to be looked at. And I agree with that. We've been asking for a seat at this table, but it's not available under the legislation. But that aside, that'll probably come out in the other review, but in terms of your observations around the engagement and, some of the work-ons in terms of engaging with mana whenua, could you just enlighten us on what you heard and what you saw?
Kia ora, Bowden. One of the things that was lacking, and I describe it as peacetime and wartime in terms of how you ready yourself for such a response and how you respond, is how you include those who have an important stake in this, so mana whenua, but also have capability that exists but isn't always leveraged. So one of our recommendations leans into that, so that mana whenua, iwi hapu, engaged in readiness and reduction and bring their skills and capability to fore, but also the ability to include and coordinate iwi capability in a response. I've seen it through my life many times, what iwi Māori can bring to the table in terms of these things, and it must be leveraged.
Ora, Mayor Sandra Hazelhurst.
Kia ora koutou. Kia ora, Mike, and thank you very much for your review. Can I also acknowledge our whānau who lost loved ones and our communities who are still recovering and rebuilding their lives. I have a question around the sharing of intelligence across agencies on page 45 of your report. And I'm just interested in the recommendation that there isn't any NEMA operating platform to share intelligence across Aotearoa New Zealand for one of the biggest weather events we've ever seen. There isn't any systems that currently operate. Is that what you're saying here in this recommendation?
There isn't a foolproof system. What we're identifying there is the timeliness of sharing information and the accuracy. I don't think the responsibility sits in one place, but again, when we talk about systems, it's a system that needs a focus. So timely and accurate reporting and warning right across, really important.
Ms Bush, I have a question. In your experience across emergency management and also the reviews that you've undertaken in terms of response to disasters, could you inform us or enlighten us on who is involved, the breadth of people and services involved in civil defence?
Thank you. So there's who's involved and where the accountability sits, where the leadership sits, and it's not always a clear picture around accountability, etc. We have the Act, which does define, but of course in the moment that's not always the clarity. So whether it's local, regional or national civil defence or NEMA, who's in charge, there are clear rules of engagement upon that. But civil defence and emergency management is everyone's responsibility. So whether it's community, whether it's the other emergency services, fire or FENS, police, St John's or other ambulance providers, hospitals, etc., all those emergency management systems, media, all the lifeline organisations must come together in a really coordinated, cohesive way to respond. And I know that all of those agencies are well-intentioned, but the coordination of those activities, including the public and volunteers, those good-hearted people who do what people must do in the moment, must be coordinated. So when I talked before about situational awareness, that includes everyone involved in that response, so you can coordinate those activities. You must have situational awareness to know where the risk and the need is, and you must deploy into that. To deploy, you must know where your assets and resources are. It's wide, but the coordination responsibility sits at this table.
Thank you. Mayor Ellis.
I'm really pleased that we got to that point, actually, because what's really clear in your report when you look at the timeframes of how things played out is that situational awareness at that really pointy end of time was really important. And have we been able to include in this review the terms of reference? We've had to exclude looking directly about our other support agencies. We've taken a focus which is about what's in our domain, which is the group, which is our council staff, but actually the role of those other agencies and the reviews that need to happen to create that picture. Has that been difficult for you to get to some conclusions about the system when not all of those parts are able to be reviewed all at once?
Yes, we reached out to all those agencies and I think all of them have provided us with their debrief notes. We've interviewed senior police officers, senior people from FENZ. They've all been helpful in terms of that. But the point I should make is that we need more clarity around how we bring all those agencies together. So clarity of command is critically important in any emergency response. So where does that sit? And how do we ensure all those agencies come together at one table to coordinate that response? Without that, you don't get the response that our communities deserve.
Mayor Kirsten Wise.
Thank you, through the chair. And I guess just expanding on that, Mr Bush, and you mentioned earlier around a national state of emergency as opposed to a regional or local. And obviously, there's different, I guess, for want of better words, rules of engagement across those levels. And absolutely, we all understand our accountabilities and our roles as regional leaders, but I would be keen to hear in your experience within the emergency management space, what are those additional challenges that we are facing once it's a national emergency, and how does that impact our ability at a local level to be able to respond effectively to our communities?
Thank you for the question. One of the things we have recommended, suggested in the report in terms of the national model is the first thing before they dive into any amendments is that they take a first principles approach before they design the system that sits underneath it. And one of those is where the accountabilities and functions sit locally versus regionally versus nationally. So what is the role of the centre? Is it to coordinate, support, enable? Is it to lead? My view, and my experience is that there must remain local leadership. You understand your communities. You need to lead locally and regionally. And perhaps the centre needs to enable in peacetime and support and assist you with resource and coordination. But the first point I make is let's get the principles of a national operating model right first and then design the working pieces or the operating model that sits underneath it.
Mayor Craig Little.
Mr Bush, I think you've just nailed it there, because the biggest problem we had, I think we did pretty well in Waira. We were really isolated for quite some time, but everything went back to those fundamental rules and regulations of that national. And so what we tried, we wasted more time trying to get things signed off and things like that. So where we, as you know, locally, the leaders know what we want. And even to the fact that one of my councillors said that she would never be part, because they couldn't get hold of me, they couldn't get hold of Debbie, she would never sign a declaration ever again in her life, because she felt like, she said she felt like she was signing the Treaty of Waitangi, she signed our rights away. And that really, it still hurts her to this day.
Thank you. I could go on, but that question underlines my former statement. Yeah.
Mayor Sandra.
I was really interested to read in the report about and the different levels, and because this is only the third time we've had a national state of emergency declared, and Mayor Kirsten and I signed our own declaration, and then, you know, we saw the national framework come in later on, a few hours later. And so I guess, Mike, it's sort of understanding really your recommendation that when we have a severe an event at this speed and scale, how then we work under that national framework. And I think that your recommendation there about having teams come in to guide, to still lead a regional and local response, but to have that expertise come in. Could you just expand a little bit on what you meant in that? Because, you know, I think that's a fantastic recommendation too, because it was the scale of our event and that whole national state of emergency. And I don't think we were prepared for a national state of emergency. We'd prepared for regional states of emergency. And so to understand how, you know, how we work together under that, you know, national NEMA framework, I think I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about that from that part of the report, that
Yes.
team.
Yeah, whatever the national model looks like in the future, there must be absolute clarity and no room for confusion
Yes.
about how you manage the national, regional and local responsibilities and interface. One really important thing we observed, and it's in the report, is that it's counterintuitive, that the more severe, and in this case fatal, the crisis is, the more we rely on part-time volunteers who aren't trained. So I think about the fact that, yes, there should still be local leadership because you know your environment, you know your whenua, your people are in touch with their communities. Therefore, what is the role of the centre or the national role?
Yes.
And it should be, in my view, one of support, enablement, coordination and resource. So to back them up and bring that expertise.
Yes.
As we all know, in emergency management, we have the SIMS model. That requires real capability if you're talking about those roles: intelligence, comms, operations, welfare, all of those roles, and that expertise exists. So perhaps the national role could be actually to ensure that that expertise is brought in, but it's still under local leadership, but the expertise exists.
Right, thank you.
Mr Symes.
Good, and thank you, Mike, for the report.
Good, Liam.
My question is regarding capability building within, obviously, our region as a whole, and how we look to, I guess, do that in a coordinated fashion with the national NEMA setup as well. I know that from our perspective in local communities, the small community perspective, there's a lot of capability there exists. And so the question is, how do we leverage that capability that exists within this proposed new kind of looking structure going forward?
Yes, and that was borne out in one of the conversations we had on Marae with a good gentleman sitting next to you. And it was in terms of the community actually, we've got the capability, we want to make sure we're well prepared for this kind of crisis. How do we get that support? So what does that look like? What do we need to do? So what does that model look like? And again, in my view, it's the role of the centre or nationally to provide that template about how to plan, what's required in terms of resource, roles, warnings, comms, whatever. But to provide that way forward, that roadmap, and then perhaps sit down and actually help people work through that so they've got their model, so they know what to do, and support them in training and exercising throughout that community or that marae to ensure we know what we're doing and everyone's practiced at it.
Before we continue, Brendan, can I please get you to close the door? Just have noise interference, thank you. Mr Barber.
Yep, kia ora, Mike. I see recommendations 1 and 3 talks about a couple of plans that we need to do regionally. How do we ensure that, you know, we bring our communities along on their journey, because our plans are only as good as the support that they have from out in the community. Yeah, so, you know, those are a couple of big recommendations I saw.
Yeah. I mean, that requires a real partnership approach. So going into those communities with an open mind, working out what capabilities exist, what need to exist, and how do you bring those together in a plan, which again, you practice.
Yes.
There are no final questions or comments. There are none. Just on behalf of the Joint Committee, we thank you, Mr Bush, and your team. We will deliberate now with recommendations, but we do truly thank you for all the mahi that's been put into this report.
Kia ora, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Mike.
Through you, Chair, can I just make a suggestion to Mr Bush that perhaps he could help the next level of reviews and legislational changes with what you've learned through our region, what our region's been through. I'd like to think that there was a recommendation from us as regions leaders to recommend you to help with it at a national level. Because you've seen exactly from our people on the ground what needs to happen next, and this report covers it all. So
I'm hoping
Kia
you're
ora.
open to that, Mr Bush.
I stand ready to do
Here
whatever
we
I
go.
can.
Perfect answer.
Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. Okay, we do have recommendations here in the paper, unless we have questions about the paper. I think it's all self-explanatory. Mayor Wise.
Thank you, through the chair. I just was wanting to tease out a little bit further in terms of the operational readiness and work that's underway. There is talk of the capability development pathway that has been completed, and the next step is to actually roll out that program of training. And just wondering if there was some timelines around the rolling out of those training pathways.
Thank you. I might hand over to either Doug Tate, the chair of the CE group.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, the report speaks to it in a little bit more detail, so that's just noting that there's already roughly 230 people that have gone through training as part of that framework already, and just noting that we've got additional people planned for this year as well, so 800 from memory is through to 2025. So basically that training framework is underway. So.
Any further questions pertaining to the paper? There are none.
So, through you, Chair, I'd just like to make a comment on officers' recommendations, recommendation 4.
Yes.
In my view, we've got a clear roadmap that has been outlined through Bush Consulting Review, and we've got 9 priority recommendations and 66 Tier 2 recommendations. And I think that we need to have a far more connected and dedicated team to lead us through the next stage of how we take and improve how we deliver to our communities emergency management. And therefore, I would like to change a recommendation 4 to include some independent emergency management expertise to lead this next part of this work and to look at the improvements and implement the recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor Sandra, and I agree. The seriousness of implementation needs single focus and some independence. Would there be a seconder to that change? Thank you, Mayor Kirsten.
Can I just
Aidan.
support that? I think they need to have skills in CEDM, but they also need skills in engaging with communities, including mana whenua. Put mana whenua right up the top there, because, you can have all the CEDM skills, but if you can't engage with communities, it's going to be a tough ride.
Thank you.
So through you, Madam Chair, I'm happy to craft a recommendation.
Yes.
And that under independent emergency management leadership, Hawke's Bay CEDM Coordinating Executive Group develops an action plan as to how we will implement Cyclone Gabrielle emergency management review recommendations and urgently report back its action plan to this joint committee. And perhaps we could add in there, our mana whenua partners in that recommendation
I think
and
it
that
needs to be in there
relationship.
too.
Perhaps.
Don't want to, forget that one.
I'll just check with Peter from governance that you've captured all of that.
Yep.
Yep,
It's coming
so
up.
it's come up on screen. Okay, and adding mana whenua into that, thank
Yep.
you. Okay, so we're all very clear on what we're committing to here. Kia ora. I'd also like to make a change to what was on the papers recommendation 2. Can we please remove that?
We've taken it
Yes,
off,
it's been removed. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, I have got it crafted another recommendation 5. And this comes back to the making sure that we have the expertise at our table. And I think that there is an opportunity for us to have a independent board member, committee member, for us to sit at this table, for us to appoint to the CEDAM Group Joint Committee, to be the eyes and ears for us, for our community, to have that expertise, to ask the right questions, to make sure we're delivering the best we can for our community. And I think that that independent committee member who has that expertise would be a huge asset and value to this committee.
Thank you, Mayor Sandra. Can I have a seconder for that new recommendation? Thank you, Mayor Alex. Fantastic. So we now have 5 recommendations, considering we've taken out 2, so really that's 4 now. Yep. Okay, so everyone's quite clear on what those recommendations are. Are there any other speakers to these recommendations, please? Alex, please. Mayor Alex.
Thank you. Look, this has been a really important piece of work, and I think of the frustration articulated in our communities at this point when the cyclone was overwhelming us, quite frankly, is how the report articulates it, and the frustration that our community members across our system had in interacting with that. And this piece of work really helps us craft the lessons from that frustration, so that we can make sure that in an interface in the future, both as we're preparing and readying ourselves, but also if we have to respond again, that there's a lot more clarity about how that interfaces together. And when I think about the recovery conversations we had across our communities in the weeks and months following the cyclone, so often that language of community resilience, of old school civil defence, of how do you help us at a community level be armed to be able to interact with the wider emergency management system. And this report really clearly talks to that. It talks to how we actually need to take an overhaul approach to how we operate as an emergency management system in the region, both at a local community level and at a regional level, and then really helpfully that interface to the national level as well. And so this is a broad set of recommendations that I think are very wise counsel for us in terms of how we move forward to learn these lessons and to create a system that will better support us in the future. So very supportive of endorsing this report.
Thank you. Further speakers? Mayor Kirsten, thanks.
Thank you, through the chair. Even after more than a year, it is still very difficult to talk about some of those moments that directly after Cyclone Gabrielle. Would be fair to say our world was turned upside down. Lives were lost, livelihoods were lost, our sense of safety and security was lost. And as others before me today, I do want to acknowledge every person in our community who experienced some form of loss. And now it's vital that we do not lose the lessons of this experience, which is why this process, this review, this report is so incredibly vital. As has been said, it provides us with 9 Tier 1 recommendations and 66 Tier 2 recommendations. But more importantly, it provides us with a pathway forward. It clearly highlights that transformational change is required, not just here in Hawke's Bay, but across the whole country. And it provides some clear recommendations about how we can work towards that. So I know certainly here in Hawke's Bay, we are absolutely committed to working together with our communities and all of our partner agencies to progress these recommendations and progress them at pace to ensure that we can restore that sense of safety and security that our community needs and deserves. I fully support the recommendations before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Kirsten. Any further speakers? Mr. Barber.
Yeah, kia ora. E te hea. I think for me, it's about connecting up. you know, we've, as leaders have been quite united right through pre-planning and, you know, response to mea. I think we have communities out there that can do the mahi. They want to do the mahi. Well, we need to be able to connect them up, you know, and it's about that coming together. I think the report's very clear on leveraging a lot of the resources, whether that's mātauranga, whether that's capability that exists, but there's more needed, more investment into our local communities. I think that's the big one for me, is supporting our rural communities, our Māori mana whenua, iwi PSGs, because they did respond, and if they're part of the planning, pre-planning, you know, that's going to be so much better the next time this happens.
Well, Mr Barber. Mayor Craig Little.
I think it's all been said. I'm pretty happy.
Mr Symes.
Yeah, just to talk of what's been said and the report and the work that's been done and the recommendations, it's about how we move collectively forward together as a region, as a whole, working together both locally, regionally and nationally.
Mr Huakirangi, I know you've joined us near the end of the process, but would you like to make any comment?
Cool. No, it's all been said.
Kia ora. And Mayor Hazelhurst.
Oh, thank you, Chair. You know, this is a hard day for everybody, but it's also an opportunity for us to move forward now, and we are heartened that we have a way forward and a pathway. And I think that the independence of expertise, emergency management, both from a management perspective and a governance perspective, is going to give our communities the trust and confidence that if we have another event, that we will be able to respond in the way that they want us to. So I'm very pleased with the recommendations that we have got this independence expertise across both management and governance. And so and I'm very grateful that so many people participated in this review, that our community came out, they wanted a place to be able to tell their story, and they've had that opportunity to do that. And I'm very, very pleased to see today that we had so many submitters and so many people that responded to a review and made some very, very positive suggestions on a pathway forward. So we thank our community for that.
Thank you, Mayor Sandra. Just like to tautoko all the comments here in our united, coordinated way in which we've undergone this review and accepting these findings that, quite frankly, are not tinkering. This is overhaul. So that's the direction we're giving to our CEs, also to national government on how we'd like to partner with them going forward with our communities, with mana whenua and businesses. So with that, we have our clear recommendations proposed there. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Kua mana. Thank you all. That ends our agenda for today. We do have a media briefing following this meeting. Yes. But for now, can you please close us in the fashion that you opened us, Mr Barber? Kia ora.
Kia ora no tātou, e tātua, koe kei ki te paunga tēnei huhuinga, no reira, ko kōrero hia nā kōrero, i tēnei rā, āwhinatia mai a mātou kia tutuki pai ai, i ngā whakakitenga kei roto i tēnei ngā rīpoata, kia ke panuku ai, te matawa Māui, o tira ngā whānau, ngā hapori, me ngā hapu. No reira, tēnei tamata i nei inua, kia koe, te atua, Māu e whakakapi, Māu anō e whakamana i rungi tinua tapu o i Christ o mata kai whakaora. Āmene.
Āmene. Kia ora tātou.